States in November of 2018 to serve as the sixth Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection at the Department of Homeland Security. He now serves as the first Assistant Director for Infrastructure Security within the newly renamed U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. He is the former Managing Director of Enterprise Security at the Duke Energy Corporation. He's also the former Director of the Energy ISAC and Director of the Critical Infrastructure Protection Programs at the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, where he was charged with helping protect North America's electric grid from physical and cyber attack. He spent time during his career in the U.S. Marine Corps, happy belated birthday, and various private sector agencies with the goal of protecting the United States from security threats. And as I already mentioned, he graduated from the Penn State Master of Professional Studies in Homeland Security program, and he also serves as a member of the Penn State Homeland Security Program Advisory Council. So Brian, welcome. Thank you so much for speaking to us, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Well, all right. Well, thank you, Dr. Ostetek. Appreciate that. Thank you to the staff, the professional staff within the Penn State program. Always an honor to give back, so to speak, to the university that has quite honestly given me a whole lot to my career. So a little bit about myself. You just heard a little bit about the bio. That's not super important. I think what really is the main takeaway there is I am not an inside the beltway bureaucrat. I have done real security my entire life, whether it's law enforcement, the military, corporate security, and now seeing things through kind of the government lens. And so I recognize that the products and services and expertise that comes out of Washington, D.C. needs to have a value proposition associated with it. I think for the last number of years, we've done a lot of really good things that nobody knows about. So it's an opportunity to shine a light on some of the products that DHS has, but also, we've also put out a lot of products that have collected dust and have sat on somebody's bookshelf for years. And so in coming here now to DHS for the past year or so, I recognize that there needs to be that value proposition. We need to be continuously assessing what the demand signal is from private industry in terms of what is needed from the government, what is needed from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. So I'm trying to bring that level of scrutiny, that level of efficiency, and really drill down to what is needed by industry rather than we're from the government, here's another great product that you should take a look at and read. I think that's a little bit counterproductive and isn't giving the American people their money's worth in terms of our product, services, and expertise. So I'm from the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA. We are formerly known as the National Protection and Programs Directorate, or NPPD. Say that 10 times fast and bonus points if you even knew what that meant. But really, at the end of the day, that was a headquarters level component that was focused on cyber, but also infrastructure protection. And so we are known within CISA as our nation's risk advisors. Notice I did not say risk managers. Managing risk really resides within the purview of the private sector. Within the federal government, I often tell people that, I am a pusher of good product and influence, and that's really what I do. I don't own infrastructure. I don't own a ton of resources that need to be secured. I think I have, and we as the government have the expertise, the lessons learned, the industry best practices to try and mitigate risk as best as we can. Note, though, that we'll never, ever eliminate all risk. Risk will always be left on the table. But it's our job to ensure that we have relationships that are made under blue sky conditions. We have the right people sitting around the table that understand risk and how to mitigate it. And then the channels of communication in terms of threat, vulnerability, and consequence are always open, and we're able to have that dialogue back and forth, whether it's in open source or it's in classified channels. And so we are really focused on helping manage systemic risk to our nation's critical infrastructure or our national critical functions. And we are aimed to raise that security baseline with some of our tools and resources that they need to secure critical infrastructure. So I think I'll stop there just for a moment and just kind of describe what is critical infrastructure. That might seem like a pretty obvious statement, but it's everything from power grid to water systems to the financial systems, but it's also stadiums, racetracks, our police stations, our hospitals, our medical centers, our universities and campuses. This is critical infrastructure. These are the things that make up the fabric of the United States, the things that we need in terms of critical services in order to be a leader on the world stage, but also ensure that we have reliable services to the American population that needs it. So one of our key catchphrases, if you will, is defend today and secure tomorrow. And I think many of you who are serving in some sort of military, law enforcement, security, or even academic areas now will probably relate to the fact that we're very, very good at doing the tactical day in and day out things. In my world, in my business, we're very focused on ensuring that pipelines stay secure, that the transmission and the power grid remain secure, that you're able to pull clean drinking water from the tap, and you're able to walk into your bedroom, flip on the switch with the understanding that the lights are just automatically going to come on. But we also need to be focused on the threats of tomorrow. And this has really, I think, been a challenge for the Department of Homeland Security because, we were formed in 2003, right after or right on the heels of 9/11, obviously. And so for a number of years, we've very much been a post 9/11 anti-terrorism organization. And we are seeing a modification to that now. We are seeing a maturation to that now. And we are trying to gravitate towards where the risk is. And I will tell you from my perspective as a political within the department, we need to be moving towards the sound of gunfire. We need to be moving towards soft targets in crowded places. We see these incidents play out over and over every single day, or at least weekly on the television, where a gunman or some sort of individual goes into a house of worship, a zoo, a stadium, a racetrack, a mall, the Walmart, a school, a campus, whatever the case is, and with the understanding that they can do significant damage because there isn't a strong security apparatus in place. And so while I have traditionally been focused on critical infrastructure protection, we need to move towards these other areas of soft targets and crowded places. And I'm going to come back to that here in just a little bit. But I do want to kind of set the stage that the mission of the Department of Homeland Security is morphing as we speak to domestic terrorism, to soft targets, crowded places, but also nation state actors that are focused on our critical infrastructure. I will be the first one to tell you that the owners and operators of critical infrastructure are on the front lines of protecting our way of life. And if you think that the government is laying in wait for something bad to happen and all of a sudden we're going to marshal all of our resources, knock on your door and say, hey, we're from the government, we're here to save the day, that's never, ever going to happen. And so we are reliant on critical infrastructure to make the right investments, ensure that they have the right resources in place so that they have the ability to become a hard target. They are doing basic cyber hygiene. They are focused and building resilience and removing single points of failure from their systems. So within CISA, our mission is very clear, and that is to lead the national effort to understand and manage risk to our critical infrastructure. Our vision is very succinct, though. We want secure and resilient infrastructure for the American public. Very snappy, very quick. That is what we are all about. And so I do think that the mission and the vision are going to stand that test of time. I can tell you that the workforce is up to it, and we carry that weight on our shoulders day in and day out. I'll pause there for just a second and kind of do just a little break in my presentation and suggest to you that this last November, and we're just a week away from all of the ongoings of November, but it was Critical Infrastructure Security and Resilience Month. This is on the heels, of course, of October, which was Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And then before that in September was Preparedness Month that really FEMA drove a lot of the initiatives out of. And really, the month of November for CISA month was really focused on enhancing resilience through preparedness and exercises, but also promoting smart and secure investments in our systems, which would include, of course, redundancy and removing those single points of failure within some of our key and critical systems. Within CISA month, though, we are focused on basically 4 major themes. The first one, and I'm going to talk to this a little bit later as well, and that is this idea of convergence. Today, we are seeing the threat landscape morph and change. It is a hybrid threat landscape where cybersecurity, physical security, operational security, and then also emergency management are all converging together. Rarely do we see attacks that are cyber only or physical only. Today, much of the landscape has changed in terms of critical infrastructure protection with a hybrid or converged landscape. 2, our focus was on soft targets, crowded places. I talked a little bit about that. And elections for 2020, we have a kind of a catchphrase again. It's called Protect 2020. Feel free to use that if you want. But we're very focused on what comes next here within the next 11 months or so in terms of securing our election infrastructure, but also reducing foreign interference and influence in our election systems. And then last but not least is the insider threat. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this here shortly. Within CISA, we have 5 priorities. The first one, very focused on 5G and that supply chain. We do believe that the security of our information and communications technology networks and services are absolutely crucial, and they're a key element to national security. And they play a major role in the safety, security, and the prosperity of all of our nation, and thus is a very attractive target for foreign adversaries and those malicious cyber actors. That 5G or that 5th generation of wireless technology is going to be a crucial component of our communication networks going forward. 2, industrial control systems or SCADA systems or OT. I do not want to get too nerdy with you all on this particular phone call, but realize that within CISA, we offer the ICS or the Industrial Control Systems community a variety of different cyber services, including vulnerability scanning, risk and vulnerability assessments. We offer penetration testing, and then we also are able to validate some of the architecture and design through our reviews that we're able to do for industry. We are driving that technology innovation across the community, really to try and mature some of these key ICS systems. Now, what is ICS? It is a little bit different than your corporate IT systems. These are the major operational cyber systems that are pushing electricity from point A to point B. They're cleaning drinking water, utilizing automated systems. And so these are some of the major focus areas of CISA, basically because for the last 15 or 20 years, we really have relied on the ignorance of nation state actors and even domestic hackers here, that we've relied on their ignorance, that they don't fully understand what SCADA systems are. Well, that day is long gone. Everyone understands what ICS and SCADA systems and OT systems are today. And so we need to ensure that we're pulling many of these legacy unpatched systems that are pinging on the internet for bad actors to exploit today. We need to bring them into the 21st century as quick as we possibly can, patch them, and update them with the newest technology. 3, protecting our government networks. Notice I did not say federal government networks, as we've seen a rash of ransomware attacks over the last year or two down in Louisiana, down in Texas, up in Seattle. All of these different places have been victim of ransomware attacks. And so we need to ensure that our industry best practices, the indicators of compromise, the different malware analysis that we've been able to do across the different incidents that we've seen, we need to be able to provide our state and local, as well as our federal government partners, with cyber hygiene best practices as to how to prevent phishing and ransomware attacks. And 4, elections. And so we know back in 2016 that the Russians were in our election systems. They were very focused on influencing and, trying to not necessarily change votes from one vote to another. As a matter of fact, we saw none of that. But what we did see is the influencing through social media. And so, the Russians and others were very influential in 2016. They were back in 2018. And we darn know well that in 2020, they're going to be back again. But I'm proud to say that unlike in the past, as we move into 2020, we are better prepared today to mitigate risk to our election infrastructure more so than we ever have been, ever. We have engaged all 50 secretaries of state within all of the states. We have stood up an elections information sharing and analysis center so that we can have the ability to have conversations back and forth in near real time, so that when we see malicious activity happening in New York, we're able to provide Los Angeles a heads up, understand what those indicators of compromise are, understand what the mitigation measures to reduce the risk are, and supply those in our alerts, and again, in near real time. And last, number 5, is going to be soft targets in crowded places. And really, since coming to CISA, this has been one of my key priorities. And really, it's been dictated by the need for risk reduction and that national threat landscape. And we're talking about soft targets. When we talk about that, we're talking about malls, stadiums, those outdoor venues, racetracks, those public gatherings. And I will tell you that the threat environment has evolved. In the past couple of years, we've seen more attacks on locations that naturally attract, large crowds of people. We've seen it at the Walmart in El Paso. We've seen it at the Bar District in Dayton, Ohio, the synagogues in Pittsburgh and Poway. We saw it at the Harvest Festival concert series in Las Vegas. We've seen vehicle ramming attacks in New York City. And the list just goes on and on and on. I will tell you that society is becoming more and more violent every single day, it seems. There are racially motivated hate groups, extremist groups, and those individuals that are here in the United States with, those radical violent views who are willing to conduct those acts of violence. And quite honestly, they must be stopped before they act. So domestic terrorists, including those who would intentionally target our soft targets, they're purposely seeking out these targets to inflict the most damage and pain. And I'll tell you that the expectation by Americans is that when they go out and they cheer on their favorite team, or they practice their religious beliefs, or they dine out, or they go to a concert, the expectation is that they are going to be safe and secure. And I'll tell you, after the events that I just mentioned, the administration has heard this call to action. Shortly after the deadly events of Gilroy, El Paso, and Dayton, DHS, we collectively marshaled many of our resources and that subject matter expertise to really ask ourselves, what resources do we have? How do we help the American public stop attacks before they happen? And how do we mitigate that loss of life? And so, as I've talked a little bit about soft targets, there's a number of other issues that we're very focused on as well. They're not our top 5 priorities necessarily, but they are. Some of them are emerging. Some of them have significant amount of resources dedicated to them. And this first one really is the insider threat. I am convinced that today within private industry, we have individuals that work within our critical infrastructure companies that have that institutional knowledge as to how to bring us to our knees. They have keys to the kingdom. They understand what those crown jewels are. They have the ability to again, bring us to our knees and hurt us not only operationally, but also nationally, and also from a brand and reputation perspective as well. And so I challenge, a lot of industry when it comes to the insider threat, and that is to really have a program, understand who is working for you, and then have the technology in place to understand when data is leaving your system. Do you have a data classification program? Do you understand that at some point, one day, everyone wants to retire and become a consultant? And when they do that, typically they're going to take that proprietary information, all of your customer information, maps, schematics, trade secrets, incredibly sensitive information from your company, and they're going to push it to their email. They're going to push it to their Gmail. They're going to push it to maybe a competitor. Maybe they're going to push it to a nation-state actor overseas because they've been bought off, they've been radicalized, whatever the case is. So understanding what data is leaving our system and going elsewhere. And then on the physical security side, really having a understanding of what that pathway to violence looks like. Understanding too that the technology landscape is changing. And so, I'll use access control just as an example. If you're based out of Washington, D.C., and at 4:30 in the afternoon on Sunday afternoon, somebody's trying to badge into one of your facilities down in Richmond, Virginia, 2 hours away, that should raise a red flag. Bells and whistles and alarms should be going off that somebody is trying to do reconnaissance, somebody's trying to probe, somebody's trying to look for weak spots within your system. And maybe it's nothing that day, but maybe it is in fact something. And so do you have the technology in place that is enabling us to put some of these key puzzle pieces together? And so investing in an insider threat program is worth its weight in gold. And some might say, well, we do background checks and we do them every 7 years. And I can tell you that is no longer good enough. We need to understand that when somebody has a domestic violence episode out in town, when they have had some sort of law enforcement engagement that has produced some sort of a felony, these are the kinds of things that really start to up the risk profile within individuals at our critical infrastructure companies. And so again, engaging legal, human resources, security, operations, and having a threat management program so that we can better understand who is working for us and what in fact they're doing day in and day out. The convergence between IT, OT, and physical security. Like I mentioned earlier, we have seen a number of attacks across the threat landscape over the last couple of years where it is including both logical and physical pieces to it. I'll give you a key piece to this. April 16th, 2013, out in Pacific Gas and Electric Service Territory in Central California, there's a large 345 kV substation out there known as the Metcalf substation attack. Many of you are probably familiar with this, but prior to 120 rounds of 7.62 going downrange from a single rifle, potentially single rifle, producing $15 million in damage to very critical transformers. Prior to that happening, they went into the fiber optic ATT vaults and cut off all of the situation awareness technology, cut off all the 911, cut off all the fiber going in and out of that substation. So that substation was basically flying blind. And so again, this is just a small little example of how the threat landscape is in fact converging. So I guess I'll stop talking a little bit about that, but I do want to address drones and the counter unmanned aerial system phenomenon that we're dealing with right now. I'm sure many of you within your organizations are struggling with the drone threat. I think the entire country is. And quite frankly, I think the U.S. government, I think the Department of Homeland Security is a day late and a dollar short on this particular initiative. I think that the federal government needs to stop rustling around with tail numbers and instead figure out how do we address the overhead threat from drones. The drone piece I'll throw really into two buckets. The first one is the counter drone. And the struggle with this, of course, is today you can go to a security show, whether it's ASIS, GSX, ISC, East and West, and you can see a trade room floor, a football field, a sea worth of anti-drone technology that is absolutely illegal to deploy. You cannot have it. It is against the law. And so we need to understand that, number one, the drone threat is real. Number two, we need to do something about it beyond simply situation awareness. And so right now, I just signed off on a report that is going to Congress at the end of the month surrounding federal government authorities with respect to drones and counter UAS. And I'll tell you right now where the U.S. government can use anti-drone technology outside of military space, of course, is at a couple of our big events that we have throughout the country. They're known as National Special Security Events, or NSSE events, or SEER 1 events. Typically two NSSE events are Super Bowl and the State of the Union. There's a number of other SEER 1 events, such as some of the parades that we see, some of the fireworks displays that we see at New Year's. Some of these main big attractions that attract hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are very attractive targets. Those are ranked very highly in terms of us also providing them anti-drone technology. So that's bucket number one, the counter UAS piece. We need to be a little bit more active. I think Congress has a role to play in trying to create legislation that helps private industry mitigate this threat. Two, this is the second bucket, and that is if you own and operate drones already. And I come from industry. I led I led security at the largest utility in the world at Duke Energy. And I can tell you that drones are an absolutely awesome tool in the toolbox. But, if you own and operate a Chinese manufactured drone in your system, you are potentially introducing and incurring risk. I have seen it with my own eyes. This is not the boogeyman. There are drones that companies are using today that is taking data from their proprietary system and pushing it overseas to nation state actors that do not have our best interests in mind. So what do we do about it? You can complain all day. What do we have to do about it? Right after getting to the Department of Homeland Security, I immediately pushed out an alert to industry at the FOUO level talking about Chinese manufactured drones. So not only do we highlight what the threat is, but also how to mitigate it. Pull that SD card, pull those chips out, do not connect to your corporate IT system, and erase everything after using these drones. So again, if you already own them, and we completely understand that a lot of these Chinese manufactured drones are incredibly well performing. They are at that right price point. The Chinese have completely saturated the marketplace here in the United States. We understand that if you already own these for whatever reason you have, there are ways to mitigate it, and we articulate this and we highlight this in our alert. Looking forward, and this really speaks to defend today and secure tomorrow, we really need to be mindful over the next couple of years of space. So space is, in fact, the final frontier, but it's also the facilitator, excuse me, of many of those services that we depend on every single day. GPS, position and timing, the strategic military and civilian-owned satellites, and really that ground-based infrastructure needed to provide those uninterrupted critical services. And so as we look at infrastructure protection in the years 2045 and 2050, when everything is connected, when your cell phone is connected to my cell phone, which is connected to a refrigerator, which is connected to the 69 kV distribution substation right down the road, when everything is connected, it is introducing a new threat landscape. And we need to ensure that we are building security in from the beginning and not bolting things on in the rear. When you do that, it is inefficient, it is more costly, and it potentially provides new enemy avenues of approach. So 5 areas that I do like to advise executives on when I have the opportunity, and I'm going to make an assumption that there's a number of executives on the phone or future executives, more importantly. And so when I have the opportunity, these are some of the things that I like to talk about, and these are some of the lessons that I've learned on a battlefield, in corporate security and law enforcement, and now again through kind of that government lens. And the first one is understand that threat landscape is changing. We are moving away from that post 9/11 anti-terrorism mission, and critical infrastructure owners and operators are on the front lines, battling back nation-state adversaries. And we have the tools, we have the resources, and they're designed to aid you in defending your system. And then 2, domestic terrorism. We cannot solely look overseas for the enemy. In many cases, the enemy is already here. And so, again, being mindful of, what the domestic terrorism landscape looks like as well here is important as we mature as a department moving forward. Big bucket number 2 here, and that is understanding your gaps. It's really in, the margins. It's in the folds. It's where you're not looking that the enemy will seek to exploit. So the key question that I typically ask is, are you prepared to be overwhelmed? And that seems like such a simple question, but when an event happens and the fog of war sets in, information is incomplete, everyone is screaming on the radio at the exact same time, and now blood is dripping on the ground. Are you prepared to be overwhelmed? And if the answer is, whoa, maybe, or no, then, we need to ensure that we are focused on preparedness. We're focused on exercises. I will tell you that we do not magically get better in a time of crisis. We always default to the things that we know, the things that we've seen, the things that we've heard, the things that we've smelt. And this is why the military and law enforcement train day in and day out. And so that when real events happen, we are not completely rocked back on our heels. We are somewhat anticipating what the outcome is going to look like. And really, we need to defend what matters most. And this is based off of risk. I often tell people that we need to defend pencils like pencils and diamonds like diamonds. We can't protect everything by putting a moat with alligators and a fortress around it. We need to understand what are the crown jewels, what are the essential services that we must keep up and running, and then from there kind of branch out based off of risk. Big bucket number 3, and I've already talked a lot about it, and that is that convergence between cyber and physical security. If you are within a private corporation today and you are still operating in the silos of over here in the corner, we have corporate security. Over here under the CIO, we have the Chief Information Security Officer, and there's these silos and this giant gap and this sea of nothingness in between. That is a mistake. Today, the threat landscape is changing. Everything is hybrid. And today I'm advocating that physical, cyber, and emergency management all reside under the umbrella of a chief security officer. And number 4, understand that you may have a great compliance program. You may have a great security program, but do you understand the risks posed by third parties? And this is really that supply chain issue, right? And so, again, you may have a great program, but whether it's laptops, transformers, or drones, you might be dependent on others outside of your organization to help you in your time of need, help you restore, help you respond, come back to homeostasis. And so are these other organizations that you are dependent on, are they equally as secure? Have you gone to their location and walked their property and asked the probing questions about their security policy, programs, and procedures? And if the answer is no, I would ask you to better understand the risks posed by third parties that interact with you. And last but not least, information sharing. And it's absolutely critical. We've been talking about this for 15 years. I'm sure tomorrow there's going to be a new article online talking about the importance of information sharing, but this is absolutely critical. And, I think at times the government gets a bad rap for, not sharing information. But I will tell you now, having come from private industry, seeing both sides of the spectrum here, the real valuable information is where the rubber meets the road. It's out in the field. It's happening within industry. And if you are from industry and you are not sharing this data-rich, detailed information with the government, then that's a mistake. It cannot simply be a one-way street where government only shares and then government gets nothing back. Because I think the value of the government is to take information from private industry, put it together, compile it, dissect it, understand it, put it into a risk profile, marry that up with active intelligence, and then push products back out into industry for industry to use. You know, again, it's this silo mentality. If you are solely focused on your business and what is happening to you, you may be missing the larger picture. And I think the government has that ability. That is the value proposition of the government, is to understand the entire threat landscape across all 16 critical infrastructure sectors, marry that up with intelligence, and push out valuable information. You know, I guess I'll end here really quickly and talking about, you know, this other initiative that I think we need to gravitate towards, and that is collective defense, where it is really the understanding that what impacts you impacts me, what impacts me impacts you. And we cannot operate in these silos anymore. You know, we are all in this together. The federal government's in it, private industry is in it, all the way down to the American citizen is in it. And so we say silly things like see something, say something, but that is really a part of a society that is focused on collective defense. And I would advocate to you that we need to see a cultural shift, similar to what we saw with safety back in the 80s and 90s. You know, today, if you work in industry, and hopefully many of you do, you might, you know, immediately recognize that every single morning during that first staff meeting, it typically starts with that 2-minute safety minute or safety message, right? Everyone look around, make sure there's no tripping hazards. If we have to evacuate the building, you know, don't take the elevator, take the stairs. AED's up on the wall. You're the first one out, I'll be the last one out. If we have to evacuate, we're going to go downstairs, we're going to go across the street to that restaurant over there, and we're going to gain accountability. You know, very easy. Everyone is a part of the safety culture. And now I think we need to attach another minute, another 2 minutes, and really start to talk about the security culture, so that everyone from the CEO all the way down to, you know, the secretary and the janitor have security on the mind, where we're talking about phishing, we're talking about tailgating, we're talking about piggybacking, we're talking about that pathway to violence. And so it's on everyone's mind day in and day out. And lastly, and this truly is lastly, we need to focus on, when we invest our money, we need to invest in resilience. We need to understand that all of us one day will likely experience our worst day. One day we will be attacked again. One day we will have, you know, something happen in the middle of the night, things go bump in the night, and we need to respond. And the question that I would ask is, have we built in resilience? Have we removed single points of failure? And have we added redundancy to our systems? You know, in the military, we have this, you know, this idea, you know, never fall in love with your plan. And, you know, sometimes plans are useless, but planning is absolutely crucial, right? And so we need to ensure that, you know, as we build redundancy and invest in, you know, resilience, that we're also focused on, you know, planning and ensuring that relationships are made under blue sky conditions. And so with that, I think I'm going to stop, Dr. Osetek, because I think the real value is going to be in the question and answer period that hopefully you guys are going to do. But, you know, thank you for, you know, Penn State's really, you know, diligent work in helping keep America safe. I can tell you that DHS, we can't do it alone. I think it takes patriots. It takes those with a vested interest in how we leave this country after we depart. You know, I often ask, you know, how are our children going to talk about the role that we played to help secure America? And I think today, maybe after this call, one of the things that I would ask you to do is maybe put a to-do list together. You know, a list of items that, you know, you can do to prepare, you know, that next generation. You know, promote resilience. What are we doing to protect our critical infrastructure? How are we working, you know, for that common good of national security? And I could tell you that you have an absolute partner in the United States Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And so with that, Dr. Osetek, I'm going to turn it back over to you, but I'm happy to take any questions you have.
Brian, thank you so much. That was a really great speech. I saw you give a very similar one last week or a week or two ago at Homeland Security Week. So I was really excited to be able to have it presented tonight, because I know our students are going to get a lot out of it.
Sure.
I can see the participant list. So if anyone, actually, I see Dr. Langridge has a question. So let's start with him. I will let him ask his first. So if you've got a question, you can either click on the raise hand icon or you can type it in the chat box. If you type it in the chat box, I'll read them to Brian as he gets to the next one. So Dr. Langridge, what's your question?
Great, thank you, Jen. And Brian, thank you so much for presenting tonight. And thank you for your service to the country and to the industry as well. I sort of had two questions. One is, would you have any a lot of our students are involved with hospital and hospital systems, and I'm just wondering if you would have any pieces of your advice. So those 5 tips were really great, but any pieces of your advice that you would particularly give to healthcare systems? What is the biggest threat there, or what are their gaps or their crown jewels that they really have to protect? And then the second question is more of a practical question for students, and that is, can you tell us something that you did that really helped through your program here that you're really glad you did, or something that maybe you wish you had done differently?
Sure. Thank you, Doctor, very much for both questions. In terms of medical facilities, I come from a critical infrastructure background, obviously, so my answer is probably going to be a little bit more focused on that. I think there's a lot of medical facilities and medical campuses today that are focused on active shooter. They're focused on the See Something, Say Something campaigns. They're focused on different alerts for the different events that are happening across the campus at any point in time. But one thing that I would ask you to do is expand the net of your relationships. It won't come to a surprise when I say, engage your local utility. Because yes, you might have 72 hours of diesel fuel for backup generators to produce electricity, but what happens next? And do you have a relationship with the local municipal, the local investor-owned utility, so that everyone knows each other by first name basis? And so there's a real emphasis and there's a relationship already built in place, so that when there's an earthquake, whether there's some sort of coordinated physical cyber event, that you are on the list for restoration. And you might think, okay, well, that just goes without saying. Well, double check it, because you don't know what you don't know. And I would definitely have that relationship under blue sky conditions with, the utility, the water treatment facility down the road, of course, law enforcement, of course, EMS, but your state and locals as well. Every state in the union has what's known as a Protective Security Advisor, or PSA. And the PSA program reports to me within DHS. And these are subject matter experts that eat, breathe, sleep, and reside within your communities. And they have the ability, they're all, GS-14, GS-15, pretty seasoned individuals that, live in your backyard, that are focused on building capacity, building relationships, bringing the right people to the table. And so if you're a hospital facilitator, you're the manager of a particular campus, I would definitely think about reaching out to that Protective Security Advisor, engaging them, and talking about cascading impacts, talking about interdependency issues. Okay, if I go down, what else do I need in order to be successful? And if I go down, what does that mean for others downstream? What does that mean for other facilities that may be taking on my patients? And are these relationships built and in place, again, under blue sky conditions? And then two, what did I learn, or what can I take away from my time at Penn State? Really, it is a difference of opinion is incredibly healthy. I think the students come from all walks of life and all disciplines of life. I did not have much of a medical background whatsoever. I was very focused on securing the electric grid for the United States. And so hearing these other kind of perspectives, it is healthy. it makes you a more well-rounded and more seasoned security professional. And do not roll your eyes when somebody who doesn't share your discipline starts talking about the things that he knows or the things that she knows, because it is helpful. And I have relied on some of this obscure knowledge that I thought I would never ever use. I find myself using it more and more and more based off of somebody else's perspective that has helped me in the real world today.
Great. I guess just to make the point here, so one is that the issue around, well, you graduated a few years back. The Homeland Security program has really matured at Penn State, has really matured a lot. We have a number of different options now. So there's a lot more opportunity for our students as well. So we do still include much of what you talked about, particularly electrical grid and some of the collaborative work with the hardware store, with the government agency, particularly within our PHP 530, the healthcare system protection course. So that's good to hear that that's still a part of that. I guess one of the things that you mentioned, a to-do list, and so I think what I'm going to do next, I sit in a lot of meetings with clinicians, with physicians and nurses, and you're absolutely right. We start with a 2-minute safety drill often. And typically people volunteer things like, oh, this central line was a problem, or we almost gave the wrong medications to this student, this patient. So I think the next time in one of those, I'm going to bring up some of the questions that you just asked, and that is, do we know what to do if there's an emergency and we have to evacuate the building? Because I just think that so many of my colleagues who are into providing patient care would never ever think about that. So you've given me something to do here in that next meeting that I'm in. So I appreciate that. So I'll stop here and see if there's more questions from our other participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually have one, Brian. If we have a lot of students that are looking to advance in their career or looking to change careers using their PHP degree, if you could give advice, I appreciate the advice that you gave while we have students in the program, but if you could give some advice to them as they're graduating and transitioning either up in their field or looking for a new job, could you speak a little bit about a piece of advice that has worked really well for you, or some guidance that you would offer them?
Absolutely. I think I've applied the same principle that I used while I was in the Marine Corps. I think that the Marine Corps is a very small community. Marines help other Marines, and so I've tried to apply that same philosophy here at Penn State. I know the rigors of the program. I know just how comprehensive it is. I know that the instructors and the professors are pushing out very polished and well put together presentations and products. And so I know that when you see somebody's name on this particular diploma, that it actually means something, and there's a lot of intelligence behind what's on that piece of paper. And so I have always gravitated towards, when a fellow Penn State alum from this particular program has sought advice, looking for some sort of a direction, or even a leg up, dare I say, even a leg up, I have tried to provide that as best as I possibly can. I feel very, very fortunate that, yes, I went through this program, but being appointed by the president was a pretty big deal, and it continues and remains to be a very big deal. And so now I think my obligation is to try and pay some of that forward, and I am going to invest in somebody that has done the hard work, and I know that the degree actually means something. And so I guess that's a long way of saying that, when other alums or other students that are going through the program are seeking advice, they're looking for a pathway or some guidance, be the first one to provide it, because I guarantee you somebody helped you along the way as well. And so, if you're going to take the elevator all the way up to the top floor, make sure you send the elevator back down. And, that's important to me.
Great, and that's something that we've really tried to do with the, again, I know we have some new students on the participant list. So we have a public health preparedness LinkedIn group. There's also a Homeland Security Program LinkedIn group. So we're constantly posting different kinds of, if job opportunities come up, we'll post them there. Or if there are conferences that we think would help you out, we'll post it there. So I really do appreciate the Penn State helping Penn State and community that we do have. So if you are a member of our LinkedIn group, thank you, and we'd love to have you, and feel free to post any of that stuff that you see. If you're not a member of the group, please feel free to send me an email, and I can show you how to. It's a closed group, so you have to request membership. So if you send me an email, I can approve your entry, and then you'll be able to see all the great stuff that we have there. It's everything from, like I said, job postings, conference postings, articles that are relevant and that might be of interest or might be helpful to you. So definitely take advantage of that if you have not already.
If I might add, Dr. Ostek, I think, just want to be of value here. I could tell you, I guess maybe it sounds like I'm being a cheerleader for my own agency here, but, right now within DHS, certainly within the government, I don't think there's a better place to be than the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency within DHS. We have incredible political support on both sides of the aisle. The budget is increasing every single year while others is decreasing. Next week, we're rolling out the schoolsafety.gov website where we're trying to help students, administrators, and parents battle back risk at schools. We're engaged in the Protect 2020 elections. All of the big ticket items that you can think of that are impacting national security, outside of border, outside of immigration, but everything else really has a touch point within CISA. And so we're hiring like crazy. We're looking for quality individuals. And so as you peruse the USA Jobs website, don't sleep on CISA.gov because it is an exciting place to be. Like I said, we're growing. We're not just in DC. We're all over the country. We're in all 10 regions of the country. And there's no doubt in my mind that you're probably able to find a really good spot to land.
I've seen a lot of the school safety things that you've done. And on a personal note, I really appreciate all of the work that you've done on that. My son goes to a small elementary school, and I've sent a lot of that stuff to the superintendent. We're building a new school, so they're putting a lot of new security features in there, and they have a new director of safety and security. So I've been sending it to both of them. Like, this is one of our former students. He's doing a lot of great work. Make sure you read all of it.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have any questions?
If nobody else does, Jen, I'll just jump in. And so it's interesting that you mentioned the school safety. Two things. One is we have a student who's very interested in school safety, so I'm sure she'll be happy to get your material. And we've had some graduates also move into the school safety area as well in Maryland, particularly I'm thinking about. So it's very relevant there. And it's just an invitation, Brian. The next time you're in Hershey or even anywhere close to it, we'd love to show you where the sweetest place on earth.
Well, thank you very much. As a matter of fact, my organization, I guess it's been maybe 2 or 3 months ago now, did a big full-scale exercise with Hershey Park in conjunction with Hershey Medical Center. And so we facilitated, we hosted, or I guess we didn't host, but we created a scenario. We got all the right cats and dogs to the table to do a full-scale exercise in Hershey. So we have a lot of ties up to that area of Pennsylvania, and of course the University main campus as well. So where there's an invite, we will travel.
And I had emailed you before about setting up a phone call, so we can revisit that topic.
Absolutely.
Okay, if there are any last questions? Okay, I don't see any. So before I let everybody go, I just want to remind everybody that we're not going to have a webinar in January. It's going to be still during the winter break. So this is going to be our last one for the fall, and then we will resume our series again in February. It'll be February 5th at 8 p.m. Eastern, and we are going to be having someone who is going to speak about public-private partnerships and how they impact public health responses. Somebody who works at some emergency operation centers for some corporations that have had some public health impact or public health participation during some major responses. So Brian, thank you so much. This was a great talk, and I really appreciate you taking your time. I know you were flying all day today, so I do appreciate you landing and then coming and doing this for us.
No, you're very welcome. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to be here. And anytime Penn State needs anything, whether it's an individual or a collective as an organization, I'm happy to help.
Great, thank you. And I look forward to continuing to work with you.
You're welcome. All right, take care and good night, everyone.
Good night.